This is the story of a man who refused to give up no matter how hard life hit him. Based on the true journey of Chris Gardner, The Pursuit of Happyness is a powerful tale of grit, sacrifice, and a father's unbreakable love for his son. Set in the early 1980s, we meet Chris, an ambitious salesman struggling to make ends meet, trying to sell medical devices that no one seems to want anymore. His wife leaves. The bills pile up. He loses his apartment, but he never loses hope.
You got a dream, you got to protect it.
With his young son by his side, Chris takes a bold leap of faith, joining a brutal, unpaid internship at a prestigious brokerage firm, competing for just one full-time position. No money, nowhere to go, but everything to fight for.
And I couldn't think of anything.
This is more than a movie, it's a reminder that sometimes the biggest battles led to the brightest futures. The Pursuit of Happyness recap starts now. Chris, like every morning, took his son Christopher to the daycare. You will see, Chris met his father at the age of 28. That is why since he was little, he had promised that when he had children, they would know who his father was. From here, Chris went to the bus stop. That part of his life was called taking the bus. Being here, a guy began to say that the machine he was carrying was a time machine. He knew it. This continued during the trip, but the reality of the device was that it was a scanner to measure bone mass. Chris earned his living by selling them. The machine showed better images than the X-ray, only at double the price. That is why many doctors considered it an unnecessary luxury. Selling 2 a month, Chris could pay the rent and the daycare. There was only one problem. For a long time, he did not sell any. One day, Chris told his beautiful wife that he could not pick up Christopher. He had to go. His wife got upset. She was working 2 shifts. She would not have time. Besides, they had to pay the taxes. At one point in time, Chris had parked in a forbidden place. He did not have to pay the fine. So they were increasing to such a degree that they overturned the car. Upon returning home, Chris noticed a Rubik's Cube. That's why he asked what it was. Linda explained that he had to accommodate the colors. A friend of his had sent Christopher without knowing that it was so difficult. After this, his wife went to her turn. That is why Chris began to solve the cube. Chris only managed to put it together on one side, but he was learning. The next day, Chris went out to sell again. At least until he saw a Ferrari. That's why Chris asked the owner what he was doing. He was a stockbroker, he replied. Chris thought that for that he needed to have gone to college. The guy told him no. He just had to be good with numbers and people. Chris observed the people at the office. Everyone looked happy. He wanted to see if so. From an early age, Chris learned whole books of mathematics. That's why he told his wife. He wanted to be a stockbroker. Linda told him not to waste time. They had debts to pay. Even so, Chris attended Dean Witter's company, who were accepting people for the learning program. Being here, he gave $1 to a hippie who played, "Please take care of my machine." When he left, he would give her more money. The woman accepted, but that part of his life was called being a fool. Upon entering, the employee told him that he could only give him an application. Everything else was done in the main office. Chris then noticed it. The woman running away with her machine. Immediately, Chris went after her. He ran and ran. But unfortunately, the woman had gone up to the subway, so he didn't catch her. As if the learning program accepted 20 people every 6 months. However, in the end, they only accepted 1. The next day, Chris noticed a report from Rubik's Cube. He said it was extremely difficult, although a math teacher had achieved it in 30 minutes. After this, Chris began to walk with his son. The boy told him that his nickname was Lightning. Chris replied that when he was little, they called him 10-gallon head. Of course, because he was smart. His son here also told him about the programs he saw in the daycare. Programs like the Love Cruise. Chris, when he left his son, told the caregiver that to watch television he could do it at home. The woman told him that if he wanted he could take the boy. Something he obviously didn't do. He needed the service. After this, Chris went to meet Jay Twistle, the human resources supervisor of the company. The subject only took the application. He had other things to do. When Chris left, he noticed something. The hippie and another subject with his machine. That's why he immediately went after them. That part of his life was called running. The subjects got on a bus. That's why Chris accelerated. Chris knew it was his machine because he was the only one who sold them in the city. Years ago, he had spent all his savings on it. They were revolutionary. That's why he even took a picture with them. Losing one was losing food for a month. Fortunately, he reached the bus. And without further ado, he took the machine from the thieves. When they returned home, the three celebrated Christopher's birthday. Although Linda was upset to see him arrive with another machine, Chris told her the story. But Linda was starting to get tired. The next day, Chris again tried to talk to Mr. Twistle. The man said he should go to Noe Valley, so not to miss his chance. Chris said he was going there too. Maybe he could accompany him. The man accepted. That's how Chris told him about his application to the program. He also told him that he had been in the Navy. But the subject did not pay attention. He was more focused on solving his cube. Chris said he could solve it. The subject replied that it was impossible. That's why Chris started. When he saw Chris, the man was amazed. Even the taxi driver saw him. Chris kept moving forward, but the taxi was getting closer and closer to his destination. So when they arrived, Chris had solved it. The man loved that. He would see Chris later. There was only one problem. Chris had not paid the taxi. Noticing it, Chris told the taxi driver to go to the park, and as soon as he could, he started running. In that, he returned. He had forgotten the machine. The taxi driver tried to stop him, but Chris pushed him and ran away. He felt it. The annoying taxi driver was after him. Chris immediately got off the subway station. It seemed that he had lost the man. But again, he was there. A train was about to leave. That's why he got desperate. But the machine was stuck. So he had no choice but to let it go. There was a month of food. As soon as he could, Chris called Linda. He felt he had not gone through his son. Linda, upset, told him that it was his fault that he had not gone to his turn. She was fed up. She would go and take Christopher. At that moment, Chris thought of Thomas Jefferson. He had written in the Declaration of Independence that everyone had the right to seek happiness. Perhaps happiness was something that everyone was looking for, but they would never find it. When he got home, Chris saw that it was true. Linda had left with Christopher. At that moment, Mr. Twistle called. He wanted to meet him. For this, he had to call his assistant. Chris had nothing to write down. That's why he memorized the numbers and ran away, writing them down on paper. Wayne was here, so Chris told him that he owed him $14. The guy replied that he would pay him. After this, Chris returned home. He felt very sad. The next day, Chris told Linda that she could not take his son. She replied that she was no longer happy. So Chris told her to leave. But Christopher would live with him. When he left the daycare, Chris picked up the little one, preparing hamburgers for him. The landlord arrived here. He needed the rent money. If he could not pay it, he could go to the motel that cost half. He wanted it out for the next day. He needed to paint the apartment. Chris told him that he would paint it. He just had to give Chris a little time. The landlord accepted, which is why the next day he started painting. However, the next day the police arrived. He had to pay his fines. Chris gave him a check, but an officer told him that until he was checked, which would be until the next day at 9:15, he could not leave the station. Chris told them that he had to go for his son. Apart from the next day, he would have an interview, but the officer said they could not help him. Without further options, Chris called Linda. She had to go for Christopher. He just asked her to pick up him. So it was that he spent the whole night at the police station. As soon as they checked the check, he ran to the office. He quickly got his turn. They were surprised when they saw Chris. Chris told them that he had tried to invent a fantastic story about why he was dressed like that. But the reality was that he had been arrested for not paying his parking fees. Before that, he was painting. The boss of the company, Mr. Froome, asked Jay how many times he had seen Chris. The subject replied that several. He was determined, although he had never seen him dressed like that. The boss also asked if he had been the best in his class. Yes, Chris replied. I am also the kind of person who, if I don't know the answer, admits it. But then, I do not stop until I find the answer. Froome asked one last question. Tell me, Chris, what would you say if I hired someone who shows up without a shirt? That surely he was wearing very nice pants. This made him laugh. He was accepted. Jay Twistle congratulated him. They would be seeing each other. Chris told him that he would let him know. This confused the subject. He had done everything to give him the interview, and now Chris rejected it. Chris told him that it was before knowing that there was no pay. Jay told him that calling him at night would replace him. That's why Chris started thinking. It would be part of the program. Only one would be hired at the end of 6 months. During that time, he had to sell 6 scanners. It was the only solution. At night, Linda brought Christopher. She also wanted to tell him something. She would go to New York. His sister's boyfriend had opened a restaurant. They would give her a job. Chris told her that he was fine, but he would not take his son. Linda told him that the best thing was to take Christopher, but Chris replied that he could not take care of his son. Chris also told her that they had accepted him in the program. Hearing this, she told him that he was fine. She would leave the boy. Only please tell him that I loved him. Then, Linda left them with tears. So Chris called Jay's assistant. It was a great honor to enter the program. The next day, the neighbor, Gwen, helped Chris move. That day was Saturday. It meant that they would play basketball. Although later, they would try to sell a scanner. Little Christopher loved basketball. That's why he said he would be a professional. Chris told him that maybe he would not achieve it. He was not very good at playing, so if he had given his skill, it would be good in other things, but not in basketball. The son heard this, feeling sad. Chris noticed his mistake. That's why he told him to never let anyone tell him that he can't do anything. Not even him. If he had a dream, he had to protect it. If he wanted something, he had to go after it. And here they went to sell the machine. On the way, Christopher had doubts. Like when he would see his mother again. Although Chris did not know. The son also told him a joke. A man was drowning in the sea. A boat asked if he needed help. But the man said no, because God would save him. Then another boat arrived, so the man said the same. In the end, he drowned. So in heaven, he asked God why he had not saved him. God said, "What are you talking about? I sent you to boats, fool." After this, they arrived with the doctor, who fortunately bought the scanner. On Monday, the training arrived. That part of his life was called learning. Alan Frakish, the manager, told them that they would be given a list with potential customers. With the weeks, they would call each one, and they would try to sell them financial plans. They also taught them their system. At the end, he opened an exam. Although it was not the most important, the subject had taken 96 out of 100, and he had not been hired. At the end of the break, Chris ran into Mr. Frome. Although in that, he saw an old man carrying his machine. That's why he told him to excuse him. Chris started running. The subject was in a hurry. He wanted to his machine. That's why Chris accelerated. He was hit by a car until the windshield was broken. Getting up, Chris was not worried about himself, but because he had lost the machine. Chris did not find his shoe either. So he went back to the office without shoe. With the days, Frakish did his errand to Chris. I asked him to bring him coffees, donuts, this at any time, every day. Chris of course felt underestimated. Still, he did not complain. Being here, he made many calls. The one who sold more at the end of the 6 months would be hired. The others had 9 hours to call, but he only 6. After all, he had to go for his son. That's why he did not drink water and did not go to the bathroom. So he won 8 extra minutes a day. Even with this, after 2 months, he noticed that he did not advance on the list. That's why he decided to skip a couple of names. Calling Water Ribbon. The subject told him that he was available in 20 minutes. After that, he would go to see the football. Chris immediately went to his office. However, Frakish told him to please move his car. Chris did not refuse, only that the car door would not open. After this, he went to park it, and as soon as he could, he started running. When the secretary arrived, he told him that Water had left. What disappointed Chris. However, that's not the only problem. He got a parking ticket. So now, the car had a fine. That's why he had no choice but to issue a check. Here, he also told his son that on the weekend, they would possibly go to a football game. The day finally arrived. That's why the guys personally visited Water. Christopher, as always, took his captain to America, although he did not believe that his father would take him to the game. As if to meet with Water, Chris said that he was only visiting a friend. He had wanted to apologize for arriving late to his appointment. Maybe they could meet again. Water said there was no problem. Chris said that he was going to the football game. Water heard him and said he would take them. They could be with him and his friends on his stage. The boys were delighted. Here Chris met several successful subjects. He also insisted with Water about investing, but Water couldn't trust him to manage his finances yet, because he was still new to the company. He should enjoy the game, something that his son definitely did. At the end of the game, Water said goodbye to Chris. Although Chris thought that he had not achieved anything that day, then he would realize that he was wrong. Over time, Chris sold all the scanners. It seemed that everything was improving. Although one day, he had to face reality. The government had charged him taxes directly from his bank account. That part of his life was called paying taxes. He was officially broke. He only had $21 left. Chris immediately went to bill Wayne for $14. But Wayne thought they were at hand. He had helped Chris move. Chris was upset with him. He had only given him a few dollars. It had been 2 streets, but Wayne did not pay him. Chris did not know what to do. He owed the rent. Everything collapsed. But then he saw it. A light of hope. He saw the old man carrying his machine. Chris quickly went after him, grabbing the machine. After that, he cleaned it and took it to a doctor. However, he was not. From here they visited another. He did want to buy it. There was only one problem. It did not work. Disappointed, Chris returned home. But his day only got worse. They had thrown us out for not paying the rent. Christopher said to only open. But Chris told him they could not. They both went with Wayne. But even though they played and screamed, Wayne did not open them. Without another option, they both went to the subway. Chris did not know what to do. Although in that the little one interrupted. It was not a time machine. Chris lied. Chris replied that in fact it was. If he closed his eyes and pressed a button, they could go to the past. Christopher replied that he did not believe him. That's why Chris told him that they would do it. By making it clear nothing happened. But Chris said he could see them. They were dinosaurs. The boy, using his imagination, said he saw them. Even a T-Rex came. They had to hide in a cave. Both ran to the bathroom. Here Chris put the insurance. Now they were safe. With the passing of the minutes, the boy fell asleep. But in that, they began to hit. Chris put his foot on the door. The blows insisted, so the tears ran down the cheek of Chris. Now he did not know what would happen with his life. The next day, they went to a shelter. They needed a place to stay. The woman told them that it was only for women and children, but they could go somewhere else. Although they had to run. The places were ending. The boys immediately went. It was a long line. With the passage of time, Chris approached. They were in for places, but then the manager said that the spaces had ended. They would only receive for more. And while that happened, a guy sneaked in. Chris, seeing how annoying he was, told him to get in, but the guy said no, which triggered a fight. Fortunately, a man told the truth. It was the place of the boys. That's how they got in. Chris put his son with a Captain America toy. They had to sleep. He would do something else. He repaired the scanner. Soon, the light went out, so only using the light from the outside he began to read. With the days, Chris began to sell financial plans. He had learned to do it fast, not because he wanted to, but because he had to be in the shelter at PM. One day, they were late. The bus was at a standstill. That's why they ran. Here, Captain America toy fell. Christopher wanted to go back for him. Chris did not want to leave his son without his only toy, but there were priorities, sacrifices, and that day it was worth it for a place in the shelter. They also began to go to church. Chris really appreciated that despite everything that had happened, God had not let them fall. Shortly after came a decisive day, the day of the exam. The first to leave was this man. Chris followed from here. When he met the man, Chris mentioned that the part of the test had been complicated. The man had not seen any test. So scared he returned. Chris was the only one who had really finished. When he left, he ran into Jeff, a man he had met during the game. Jeff told Chris to call him. After this, the boss spoke to him. He had left his wallet at the office. He needed $5 for the taxi. Chris told him that he would go for the wallet. You know, because he did not have much money. But the man insisted. He needed to go. Without another option Chris gave him. Now he only had a couple of dollars. That also made him lose valuable minutes, so they did not reach a place in the shelter. With the little money he had, he bought a slice of pizza for his son, but he knew he had to do something. That's why he sold a unit of his blood. It was 20 for valuable dollars. He invested in a light bulb for the machine. The next day they reached the shelter. Here Christopher asked if his mother had left because of him. He did not say Chris. She left because she wanted. You are not to blame. Christopher replied that he was a good father. And yes, it was. Since instead of sleeping like everyone else, Chris began to repair the scanner, something that fortunately he achieved. Then, the next day, he took it to the doctor. $250 to live another month. That was a reason to celebrate. So this time, they spent the night in a hotel. The next day, they both went to the beach. They wanted to get away from everything, from the noise, from the stress. Only the two of them were there. The following days, Chris continued to sell financial plans. Even Jay congratulated him. He knew he was doing well. Chris get 31 clients from Pacific Bell, and then Jay asked if he was nervous. There was only 1 day left, but no matter what happened, he must have done a great job. Chris did not know how to feel about it, but soon they called him. Here they told him to sit down, which only made him nervous, but then he heard it. He was hired. This meant that he could not hold back his tears. Everything had been worth it. The boss, Mr. Frome, also gave him his $5. So Chris left the office. That part of his life, that little part. It was called happiness. Chris was happy. He ran with his son and hugged him. Everything had improved. Chris started working at Dean Witter Reynolds in 1981. And only 6 years later, in 1987, Chris founded his own company. In 2006, he sold a part of it for a multi-million sum. The real Chris even appears in the final scene of the movie. That's right, it's this man, and apparently, his quest came to happiness. The Pursuit of Happyness teaches us that success isn't just about talent or luck, it's about never letting go of what matters, even when the world tells you to give up. It's about believing in yourself, no matter what your circumstances are. And most of all, it's about love, persistence, and the pursuit of something greater than comfort, happiness. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring movie recaps.